There is a mountain where the wind moves against the slope, where shepherds have refused to sleep after dark for 10,000 years, not because of superstition, because of memory. A memory older than any religion, older than any government, older than the oldest book you have ever held in your hands. 200 beings gathered on that summit and swore an oath before they descended. What they did next corrupted the human genome, destabilized the biosphere, and triggered a planetary reset so total that every civilization on Earth recorded it in their oldest surviving texts. The Church knew. They removed the evidence in 367 AD. The desert returned it in 1947. And what is happening in laboratories and in the skies above us right now suggests that what was started on that mountain was never finished. This is not mythology. This is an open investigation. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you will never read Genesis the same way again. There is a mountain at the edge of 3 nations where the wind does not behave like wind. It moves against the slope. It circles the summit as though searching for something it once knew. The locals have always felt it. The shepherds who have grazed their flocks on its lower ridges for 10,000 years will not sleep on that mountain after dark. They do not explain why. They simply descend before the sun does. Mount Hermon rises 9,000 feet above the ancient world, its peak draped in snow, even in the summer heat of the Levant. 3 nations share its shadow today: Syria, Lebanon, Israel. But in the deep grammar of the ancient world, it belonged to no nation. It belonged to a decision. The name itself is the first clue. In Hebrew, the root of Hermon is cherem, a word that means anathema, a thing devoted to destruction, a thing placed outside the boundaries of what is permitted. The mountain was not named after the event. The event was named after the mountain. The geography was already cursed before anyone arrived to curse it. 200 beings gathered on that summit. The text calls them the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God. They came not as refugees, not as outcasts, but as a coordinated unit executing a deliberate plan. They swore a binding oath on that peak, each one to the other, because they understood the weight of what they were about to do. You do not swear a mutual oath unless the act is so severe that only collective guilt makes it bearable. This was not a fall from grace. This was a military-grade defection from the celestial order. And the first question the ancient texts force upon us is not what they did, but what they looked like before they did it. Before the descent, before the biological compression, they existed in a state the Zohar describes as levushei nehora, garments of light. Not metaphor, not poetry, a literal photonic condition in which consciousness and form were unified without biological weight. To become what they needed to become, they had to shed that state like a skin. The Zohar is precise. The Watchers exchanged luminosity for opacity. They traded a body that did not age for one that would rot. They chose heaviness. They chose hunger. They chose the sensation of cold stone beneath their feet and the smell of rain on dry earth. The fallenness was not a punishment imposed from outside. It was a biological election. They pressed themselves into matter, and matter accepted them. The light went out one by one, like stars choosing to become stones. They did not descend for women alone. That reduction is what Sunday school offers, a simple story of lust, cleaned up and made manageable. But the text is more disturbing than that. Samyaza, the leader of the 200, was not primarily interested in flesh. He was interested in code. The Book of Enoch preserves the specific Aramaic legal language of the oath they swore, and it is the language of a military covenant, not a romantic impulse. Samyaza feared that his companions would abandon the mission and leave him alone to bear the judgment, so they bound themselves legally, each name recorded, each signature a chain. Azazel, the second in command, had a different obsession: Where Samyaza wanted lineage, Azazel wanted dominion over human civilization itself. The tension between those two ambitions would fracture the 200 into two factions, one building families, the other building empires. The first interaction at the gates of a human settlement did not change history. It replaced the history that was supposed to happen with something the Creator had not sanctioned. What emerged from those unions was not merely large. The ancient sources describe the first generation Nephilim as beings of 3,000 ells, a figure that defies easy visualization. 1,800 feet of hybrid consciousness moving through a world built for creatures 5 feet tall. But the physical dimension was only the beginning. These beings carried what we might call residual celestial memory, inherited access to the cognitive architecture of their angelic fathers. They did not need to learn. They arrived knowing. Metallurgy, cosmetics, pharmacology, the specific properties of roots and cuttings that could alter the architecture of human consciousness. Azazel taught all of it, and humanity accepted the knowledge the way a starving man accepts bread without asking who baked it. The first city-states rose in the shadow of this exchange. Bronze was smelted, pigments were crushed into powders that changed the face and, according to the text, changed the soul. The civilization we celebrate as the dawn of human progress was, in the accounting of the oldest surviving documents, a transaction. Technology for access, knowledge for the body. And as the smoke of the first foundries rose above the first walls of the first cities, something moved between the houses of men, something whose shadow fell across two doorways at once. The caloric requirement of a being that size collapsed local ecosystems within a generation. Forests vanished, animal populations were consumed faster than they could recover. The Nephilim ate the world, and when the world ran out, they did not stop eating. The cries that began to rise from the valleys of the earth were not the prayers of the righteous. They were the sounds of a planet being consumed by its own corruption. And somewhere in the hierarchy of heaven, a threshold was being reached. A line that once crossed would trigger a response no mythology on earth has ever fully prepared us to understand. The giants began to dream. This is the detail that the fragmentary text known as the Book of Giants, recovered from the caves at Qumran, preserves with an intimacy that feels almost clinical. The Nephilim, those first-generation hybrids of angelic pneuma and human sarks, began to experience something their fathers had never known in the celestial realm: unconsciousness, sleep. And with sleep came visions they could not control. The Qumran fragments describe two of the greatest among them, Oya and Haya, sons of Samyaza himself, waking from nightmares in cold terror, unable to explain what their sleeping minds had shown them. Tablets being written, a sentence being handed down, their own names being submerged beneath water that had no shore. These were not random firings of an overstimulated nervous system. They were collective prophecy. The earth itself was communicating with the children it had not consented to carry. But before the Nephilim could decode the warning, hunger overtook philosophy. When the animals were gone, they turned to each other. And then they turned to us. The pivot from predation to cannibalism is documented in Enoch with a plainness that is more disturbing than any embellishment could achieve. The text simply states that the giants began to sin against birds, and against animals, and against reptiles, and against fish, and to devour one another's flesh, and to drink the blood. The list is orderly, almost bureaucratic, as though cataloguing the stages of an ethical collapse that followed a predictable sequence. First, the wild animals, then the domesticated ones, then the boundaries between species, then the boundary between predator and kin. These were not savages acting from ignorance. They were intellectually superior beings, carrying the residual memory of a celestial order, watching themselves descend through every moral threshold with full comprehension of what each crossing meant. They were starving gods trapped in decaying meat. And the horror was not the hunger. The horror was the awareness. They built to survive the awareness. The megalithic structures that still confound modern engineers, the basalt foundations of Bashan, the cyclopean walls of pre-Hellenic citadels, the dolmens that dot the Levantine plateau like punctuation in a language we have forgotten how to read. These were not monuments to ego. The Watchers had taught their children the science of frequency and resonance, the knowledge that certain arrangements of mass at certain angles to the Earth's magnetic field could create a stabilizing effect on a consciousness too large for its biological container. Sound was used to move stone, not as a miraculous exception, but as an applied technology. The structures were not tombs, they were batteries. The giants were trying to anchor their disintegrating energy to the physical world, to buy more time in a body that was never designed to last. But the Earth, already carrying the weight of a corrupted biosphere, began to respond with increasing instability, seismic memory, tectonic grief. The more they built, the more the ground beneath them shifted, as though the planet was trying to shake off an infestation. And yet the Nephilim did not only build with stone, they built with lineage. The political innovation that emerged from the Watcher experiment was the foundational lie of every human civilization that followed: the divine right of kings. The Sumerian king list, one of the oldest surviving administrative documents in human history, records a phenomenon that scholars have debated for 2 centuries. Before the flood, the text states, kingship descended from heaven. Individual rulers reigned for thousands of years. After the flood, the reigns contract to human scale. The document is not mythologizing, it is preserving a memory of a time when the rulers of men were not fully men. Hybrid bloodlines were the original political credential. To carry the genetic trace of the Watchers was to carry the claim to authority. Governance, taxation, priesthood, war, all of it derived its legitimacy from a biological fact that the ruling class was careful never to fully explain to those it ruled. Our modern political hierarchies, with their inherited wealth and their dynastic names and their quiet conviction that some families are simply better suited to power, are the ghost of a system that was engineered on Mount Hermon before the first city had a name. But the corruption did not stop at humanity. The Book of Giants and several related Enochic fragments describe experiments conducted not on human women, but on animals, cross-species hybridization. The Watchers, having already violated the boundary between the celestial and the biological, found that boundary increasingly meaningless. The chimeras of Greek mythology, the griffin, the minotaur, the satyr, are not inventions. They are cultural memories, encoded in narrative of creatures that actually moved through the pre-flood world. The biosphere was being systematically rewritten. Nature was no longer natural. It had become a laboratory without ethics, a synthesized approximation of what creation had been designed to be. The flood, when it came, was not primarily a judgment on human moral failure. It was a biological reset, the only intervention scaled large enough to sterilize a planet. Enoch walked between these 2 worlds. He is the singular anomaly in the pre-flood narrative, a human being of such transparent righteousness that he was granted access to the celestial court while still alive in his body. The fallen brought their petition to him. They could not approach the throne directly. Their biological condition had severed that frequency. So they asked the one man on earth who still carried the original signal to carry their words upward. Enoch went. He interceded. He stood before what the text describes as a house built of crystal and fire, surrounded by beings he could not number, and he delivered the petition of the 200. The answer came back not in anger, but in the measured tone of an irreversible legal ruling. There would be no mercy. There would be no reinstatement. The watchers would be bound in the valleys of the earth until the day of judgment, and they would be made to watch. That was the specific cruelty of the sentence. Not darkness, not oblivion, but witnessing. Michael and Gabriel descended like columns of fire, and the arrest of the 200 began. As the giant blood soaked into the soil of the valleys where their children fell upon each other, something left those bodies that was not blood. A frequency. A disembodied intelligence with no vessel, no origin, no permission to exist. Born from the dying breath of a race that was never supposed to be born at all. The texts call them demons. The older traditions call them the spirits of the Nephilim. They did not die with their bodies. They scattered. And the earth received them the way a wound receives infection. Quietly, without announcement, with consequences that would not become visible for generations. The water came from below before it came from above. This is the detail that separates the theological account of the flood from every sanitized retelling that followed it. The text of Genesis does not describe rain. It describes the fountains of the great deep being broken open, tectonic rupture, the crust of the earth splitting along fault lines that had been under pressure since the weight of corruption began accumulating in the soil. The hydroplate theory proposed by Dr. Walter Brown in the 20th century describes a pre-flood Earth with massive chambers of pressurized water beneath the continental plates. Water that had been sealed there since the formation of the world. Water that required only the right trigger to transform the planet's surface in a matter of weeks. Whether one reads this as science or as theology, the mechanism is the same. The flood was not a gentle rising of waters. It was a planetary convulsion. The atmosphere collapsed inward. The crust shattered outward. The mountains we know today were thrust upward in the violence of that single geological event, and the world that existed before it, the world of the Watchers, the Nephilim, the corrupted biosphere, was not submerged. It was crushed. The Nephilim did not drown easily. The texts imply this without stating it directly. The way the oldest sources always preserve their most uncomfortable truths in the architecture of what is left unsaid. Beings of that mass and that residual celestial energy did not simply slip beneath the waterline. Water was chosen, according to the Enochic tradition, because it was the one substance heavy enough in its totality to suppress the frequency the Nephilim carried. Not to kill them, their biological bodies were mortal and would fail, but to silence the signal their dying released, to prevent the full dispersal of disembodied Nephilim spirits into an unprotected atmosphere. The flood was a containment event as much as a judgment, and yet the myths of every surviving civilization on Earth remember it. The Aztec fifth sun narrative, the Norse Ragnarok flood of Ymir's blood, the Sumerian Atrahasis epic, the Hindu story of Manu. Every culture that has a creation account also has a drowning account, and they all describe the same sequence. A world that became intolerable to the divine, a water event, a single preserved lineage, and a world that emerged afterward that was diminished, quieter, somehow less than what came before. Universal flood memory is not folklore. It is the species-level scar tissue of an event that was experienced by every surviving human population simultaneously. But the erasure was incomplete. Genesis 6:4 contains a clause that most readers pass over without registering its full weight. The Nephilim were in the earth in those days, and also afterward. After the flood, new Nephilim appeared, the Rephaim, the Anakim, Goliath of Gath and his brothers, Og, king of Bashan, whose iron bed measured 9 cubits in length. The question the text raises and refuses to answer directly is the question of mechanism. Were these new incursions a second descent of Watchers who had not been among the original 200? Were they the expression of recessive genetic material carried within the preserved human lineage? Or was Nimrod, that mighty hunter before the Lord, doing something more than building a tower at Babel. The ziggurat at Babylon was not a monument to human ambition. It was an attempt to reconstruct the conditions of Mount Hermon, to reopen what the flood had closed, to call something down from above or to pull something up from below. The language of divine response to the tower, "Come, let us go down and confuse," carries the same urgency as a security response to a breach. The tower was not a staircase to heaven, it was an antenna. In 367 AD, a man named Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria, sent a letter to the churches under his authority that would reshape the architecture of Western spiritual consciousness for the next 17 centuries. It was his Easter letter, and embedded within its theological instructions was a list, the first formal canon of the Christian scriptures. The books that belonged, the books that did not. The Book of Enoch was not on the list. This was not an oversight. The Roman Empire had spent decades transforming Christianity from a persecuted movement into a state religion. And a state religion requires a manageable theology. A theology that explains evil as a supernatural genetic experiment conducted by interdimensional beings who corrupted the human genome and destabilized the biosphere is not a theology that produces compliant citizens. It produces cosmologists, investigators, people who look at their rulers and ask which bloodline you carry. The sons of God became the sons of Seth, a reinterpretation so politically convenient that it required no conspiracy to implement. Institutions naturally select for the interpretations that stabilize them. But Ethiopia did not receive that memo. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, one of the oldest continuous Christian communities on earth, looked at the Book of Enoch and recognized in it not a dangerous text, but a foundational one. The Ethiopian tradition holds that the Ark of the Covenant rests in a small chapel in Axum, guarded by a single monk who never leaves the grounds. Whether or not you accept that claim, what it reveals is a theological culture that takes physical custody of sacred objects seriously, that believes certain texts and certain artifacts are not metaphors but materials, objects with weight and consequence that must be physically protected, not philosophically managed. The scrolls that Alexandria burned, Axum preserved. The names of the fallen angels that the Council of Nicaea preferred to forget, the Ethiopian liturgy continued to recite. While the West built cathedrals on top of a redacted story, the East kept the original frequency alive in a language Rome considered marginal. St. Augustine of Hippo was perhaps the most consequential editor in the history of Western theology. Not because he lied, but because he was brilliant enough to make a wrong interpretation feel like intellectual progress. His dismissal of the supernatural reading of Genesis 6 was not crude censorship. It was sophisticated rationalism applied to a text that resists rationalism at its core. By arguing that the sons of God were the sons of the righteous line of Seth, he gave the church a way to discuss evil without invoking the terrifying possibility that the boundaries between species and between dimensions are not as fixed as we require them to be. The theology of the unsaid was born in his study in North Africa. The systematic practice of answering every question about the nature of evil in terms that never require you to look upward or downward, only inward. It was an intellectual mercy, and it cost us everything. The Vatican's secret archives contain approximately 53 miles of shelving. The public knows this because the Vatican disclosed it. What the Vatican has not disclosed is the organizational principle of the section archivists refer to informally as the Inferno, the subterranean level where documents are held not because they are fragile, but because they are, in the institutional assessment of the Church, not ready. The Jesuit order, the Church's most intellectually formidable arm, operates the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope on Mount Graham in Arizona. Its infrared camera system was named by the Jesuits themselves Lucifer, an acronym for Large Binocular Telescope Near-Infrared Utility, with camera and integral field unit for extragalactic research. When asked about the name, Jesuit astronomers note that it is simply a technical acronym. This is true. It is also, depending on your theological framework, either deeply ironic or precisely accurate. The Church is not hiding the past. The Church, in its most sophisticated operational layer, appears to be preparing for something. And the silence of Rome on the subject of what exactly they are watching the sky for is, in the full context of everything we have examined, the loudest part of this entire story. In the spring of 1947, a Bedouin teenager named Muhammad Edib was searching for a lost goat along the limestone cliffs above the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea. He threw a stone into a dark opening in the rock face to see how deep it went. He heard, instead of the expected silence, the sound of breaking pottery. He did not go in immediately. He came back the next day with a friend, and together they entered a cave that had been sealed for approximately 2,000 years, and found clay jars containing scrolls wrapped in linen. The desert had been keeping something for them. The texts recovered from Qumran over the following decade would become the most significant manuscript discovery in modern history, and among them, in the fragment scholars catalogued as 4Q203 and 4Q531, were the remnants of the Book of Giants, the text the Church had spent 15 centuries trying to make the world forget. The desert gave back what Alexandria burned. And the year it gave it back, 1947, was the same year the modern state of Israel was proclaimed, and the same year that a private pilot named Kenneth Arnold reported 9 crescent-shaped objects flying in formation near Mount Rainier, launching the modern era of UFO documentation. 3 events in a single calendar year, each one pulling at a thread in the same suppressed tapestry. Fragment 4Q531 contains a description of a figure the text calls Gilgamesh. The connection is not coincidental. The Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest surviving work of written literature, describes its hero as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, a ratio that corresponds precisely to what you would produce in the second generation of Nephilim hybridization, when an already hybrid parent mates with a fully human one. Gilgamesh in the Sumerian tradition is celebrated as the great hero, the builder of walls, the seeker of immortality. In the Qumran fragment, he appears as a giant experiencing prophetic nightmares alongside Ohia and Hahia, processing the imminent judgment of his kind. The same individual remembered as a hero by one tradition is recorded as a monster by another. This is not a contradiction. This is the central mechanism by which the Nephilim legacy survived the flood and the canon revision and the 15 centuries of theological management. It survived by being renamed, by being recostumed as the hero. Hercules, Achilles, Goliath, stripped of context. And in the 21st century, the superhero, and being of extraordinary physical power, often of mixed human and non-human parentage, frequently in conflict with ordinary governance structures, has become the dominant mythological figure of global popular culture. We are telling their stories again in every cinema on Earth. We have simply forgotten to ask who the villains were supposed to be. The laboratories doing the forgetting today do not burn scrolls. They edit base pairs. CRISPR-Cas9, the gene editing technology that achieved practical precision in 2012, allows researchers to locate a specific sequence within the 3 billion base pairs of the human genome and rewrite it with an accuracy that was science fiction a generation ago. The stated ambitions are medical: eliminating hereditary disease, correcting genetic disorders, extending viable human lifespan. These are not cynical ambitions. But the architecture of the technology is neutral to intention, and the distance between eliminating a disease gene and enhancing a cognitive capacity or altering a morphological limit is not a scientific distance. It is only an ethical one. Jesus said that the days before his return would be as the days of Noah. The rabbinical tradition, preserved in the Midrash, specifies what those days looked like in biological terms. The mixing of species, the rewriting of boundaries, the systematic alteration of what had been made. The sin of the Watchers, in the most precise theological accounting, was not sexual transgression. It was the unauthorized editing of the image of God. They took what had been made according to a specific pattern and introduced alterations that had not been sanctioned by the original architect. The technology of that sin has not changed. It has simply been miniaturized to fit inside a laboratory. They never left. This is the conclusion that Jacques Vallée, the French astrophysicist and pioneering UFO researcher, arrived at after 4 decades of field investigation. Not that we are being visited by extraterrestrials traveling across interstellar distances, but that we have always been in proximity to intelligences that interact with our dimensions selectively, intermittently, according to a logic that does not map onto our physics. His interdimensional hypothesis proposes a category of intelligence that exists adjacent to observable reality, capable of entering and exiting our perceptual field, capable of affecting physical matter, but not native to the space-time frame we inhabit. The Enochic tradition does not call this a hypothesis. It calls it the condition of the bound watchers, beings who are compressed into biological form, whose biological forms have since failed, who now exist in the intermediate state their own texts predicted, neither fully in the material world nor return to the celestial one. The UAP phenomenon, with its documented capacity to affect military instrumentation, to appear and disappear without propulsion signature, to be tracked on radar and simultaneously observed visually in configurations that violate known aerodynamics. This is not a new phenomenon wearing a modern costume. It is an ancient presence that the 20th century developed enough instrumentation to begin measuring. Mount Hermon is still there. Its peak still carries the anomalous wind. And at its summit, in a geopolitical arrangement so strange it seems designed to be overlooked, the United Nations operates an observer force base, UNDOF, established in 1974, on the precise coordinates where 200 beings swore a binding oath before their descent. In the region of Bashan, in what is now the southern Syrian plateau and the northern reaches of modern Jordan, archaeologists have documented massive basalt structures built from stones that exceed the engineering capacity of any known Bronze Age culture. The beds of basalt, the dolmens, the tomb associated with Og, king of Bashan, the last of the Rephaim, whose iron bed the text of Deuteronomy records as 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide, approximately 14 feet by 6 feet. The physical evidence has always been present. It does not announce itself. It simply sits in the landscape, waiting for a framework that can hold it. The filter of materialism, the methodological assumption that all physical evidence must resolve into natural processes operating at human scale, is not a scientific conclusion. It is a prior commitment. And prior commitments, as the story of Athanasius and Augustine demonstrates, are the most effective tools of suppression ever devised, because they require no conspiracy. They require only the collective decision to stop asking certain questions. We are not the audience of this story. We have never been the audience. The entire architecture of what has been examined here, the oath on the summit, the compression into flesh, the corrupted biosphere, the flood, the redacted canon, the desert cave, the gene editing laboratory, the instrumented sky, describes a situation that is still in motion. The 70 generations of the Watchers binding, The time frame the Book of Enoch specifies for their imprisonment map onto a period that by several ancient calendrical reckonings is approaching its terminal boundary. The mountain still stands. The wind still circles its summit against the slope. The shepherds still descend before dark, unable to explain why, carrying in their bones a knowledge older than any text we have recovered. Somewhere in the 53 miles of Vatican shelving, in the Qumran fragments not yet fully published, in the server rooms of institutions tracking aerial phenomena, in the laboratory notebooks of researchers who have begun to notice that certain ancient genomic sequences appear in the human record without clear evolutionary precedent. The investigation continues. The scrolls were found. The fragments were photographed. The frequency, long suppressed, is audible again to anyone willing to sit in the silence long enough to hear it. The watchers are still counting the years, and the 70 generations are almost up.